You've probably heard the term white fragility, right? It's been everywhere the last few years, totally changing how we talk about race. But what if the whole idea is built on a shaky foundation? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're going to look at a really detailed critique from Jonathan D. Church's book, Reinventing Racism.
I mean, you really couldn't miss it. Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, it wasn't just a book. It was a cultural phenomenon. It sat on the New York Times bestseller list for months. And then, especially after the killing of George Floyd, when so many of us were trying to get a better handle on systemic racism, that book just shot right back to the top of the charts.
So here's the big question. What if this incredibly popular theory is, well, built on some pretty shaky ground? That's what we're here to unpack. We're looking at a critique that argues white fragility might not just be flawed, but that it could be pointing us towards solutions that, well, that just don't work.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about just how huge white fragility became. Then, we'll get into the real meat of the critique, challenging its core ideas like implicit bias and the concept of whiteness. From there, we'll look at some logical fallacies the book points out, explore a totally different way of looking at things from an economic angle, and finally, we'll see how all of this completely reframes the conversation. All right, first up, a best-selling idea. To really get what this critique is all about, you've got to appreciate just how far-reaching this theory became. Seriously, its influence went way, way beyond the bookstore.
I mean, look at this. The theory got picked up for trainings by the National Education Association. DiAngelo was giving keynote speeches at huge education conferences. And maybe most significantly, these ideas were woven into countless corporate diversity and inclusion trainings all over the country. We're talking about something that was actively shaping policy and workplace culture. Okay, so now we get to the heart of it. The critique argues that the entire theory of white fragility is basically standing on two pillars. And according to Church, both of those pillars are fundamentally unstable. What are they? The concept of implicit bias and the very abstract idea of whiteness. Let's start with the first one, implicit bias. You've probably heard of this. It's the idea that we all have these unconscious mental shortcuts or, prejudices that can make us act in discriminatory ways without even meaning to. It suggests that racism isn't always overt. It can be humming along completely under the radar of our conscious minds. So that leads to a pretty important question, right? If this bias is unconscious, how on earth do you measure it? Well, the main tool for the job is something called the Implicit Association Test, or IAT. And this is where the critique really starts to dig in, asking, hey, is this test actually any good? Is it reliable? Does it actually predict how people behave in the real world? And according to the critique, there are some pretty big red flags. For one, the IAT apparently has low test-retest reliability. What does that mean? It means you could take the test today and get one result and then take it again tomorrow and get a totally different one. But here's the real kicker. It's a poor predictor of actual discriminatory behavior. In fact, a massive meta-analysis, we're talking nearly 500 studies, found that even if you manage to change someone's IAT score, it doesn't really translate to changes in their actual behavior. And check this out. This is a perfect example of that disconnect. The critique points to a study of 80 police officers. Now, on the IAT, they showed an anti-black bias. So you'd expect them to be quicker to shoot black suspects, right? Nope. In the simulation, they were actually slower to shoot armed black suspects than armed white suspects. That finding just completely flies in the face of the idea that the IAT can predict real-world actions. Okay, so that was pillar number one. Now for pillar number two, the concept of whiteness. The argument here is that the theory makes a specific kind of logical error called reification. It's a fancy word, but the idea is simple. It's when you take an abstract concept, like whiteness, and start treating it like it's a real concrete thing that has a mind of its own and can do things, as if whiteness itself is a character walking around in society. And to push back on this idea that whiteness is the single, all-powerful system of economic advantage, the critique brings in some data. It looks at U.S. Census numbers. And what's interesting is they show that several ethnic groups, like Indian Americans, Taiwanese Americans, actually have a higher median household income than non-Hispanic whites. This kind of complicates that picture of a simple, monolithic structure. So, this all leads us right into the next section. The critique doesn't just stop at the foundations. It also hones in on some specific logical errors that it argues are baked right into the white fragility framework itself. And these aren't just academic points. They're things that can make having a productive conversation almost impossible.
Yeah, this quote really nails that reification idea we were just talking about. The point is, saying that an idea like whiteness can whisper in our ears might sound powerful, but it's a tricky way to analyze a problem. You end up blaming an abstract concept instead of focusing on the actual people, policies, and systems that create and maintain inequality. And then there's this other logical issue the critique brings up, something called a Kafka trap. This one is a real mind bender. It's basically a catch-22. An accusation is made, and if you deny it, your denial is used as proof that you're guilty. So in this context, you're displaying white fragility. No, I'm not. See, denying it is proof of your fragility. You can see how that just shuts down any real conversation. It's a rhetorical dead end. Okay, so if the critique is that the white fragility framework is flawed, then what's the alternative? You can't just tear something down without offering a different way to build, right? Well, this is where Church proposes looking at the whole problem through a completely different lens, the lens of economics. And to do that, we need to understand two key economic ideas. First, you have public goods. These are things that are for everybody, like, clean air or national defense. Me using them doesn't stop you from using them. Then, on the other hand, you have club goods. Think of a private gym or Netflix. These are for members only, they're exclusive. Now, here is the crucial point of this whole economic argument. Things we consider fundamental rights and privileges, like being safe in your community, getting a fair shake from the justice system, having equal opportunities. Those things should be public goods. They should be universal, available to every single citizen, no exceptions. But they haven't been. The argument is that, for a long time, both historically and systemically, these privileges have been treated like club goods. The benefits were essentially hoarded by the majority group, turning basic rights into a kind of exclusive members-only club. And people of color were systematically kept out. And this situation creates something the critique calls unjust enrichment. It's not some vague idea. It's a tangible benefit that one group gets because another group is suffering an injustice. The housing example is perfect. If one group has way more and better housing options, it's partly because other groups are being unfairly locked out of that same market. All right, we have covered a ton of ground here. So let's bring it all together. What are the big takeaways from this entire critique? Okay, let's boil it down. The critique claims the white fragility theory is based on unreliable tools like the IAT. It argues the theory uses logical fallacies like reification and that Kafka trap that get in the way of real progress. And instead, it offers up this economic framework, public goods versus club goods, to help us understand inequality better. The real goal, from this perspective, is to stop treating basic rights like exclusive club goods and start making them true public goods for absolutely everyone. And that really leaves us with a big question to chew on, doesn't it? It suggests that the words we use, the very frameworks we build to talk about a problem like inequality, they do more than just describe it. They actually shape the solutions we can even imagine. So it makes you think, how does the language we use to describe inequality limit or expand the solutions we can build?